For 20 years, Caleb Archer believed his father was gone. Diane Whitlock made sure of it, telling him Elliot Archer was a dangerous man who destroyed everything and disappeared without a trace. Caleb never questioned it. Not when he left for the Navy, not when he became a SEAL, not even when he returned to Annapolis to close the last chapter of a life he thought was already buried. But one quiet evening, walking along the cold wooden pier with his German shepherd Vargo, something changed. The dog stopped. Not hesitated. Not distracted. Stopped. Ahead of them sat a homeless man, worn down by time, barely noticeable to anyone else. Caleb would have walked past, just like everyone else, if Vargo hadn't made a choice. Then the man reached for a cup, and his sleeve slipped. Caleb saw it. A scar. Not just any scar. The one he watched his father get, years ago, in a workshop that no longer existed. That moment didn't bring back a memory. It exposed a lie. Because the man he had been told to forget was sitting right in front of him. If this story moves you, let me know where you're watching from. Share your thoughts, hit like, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's keep spreading stories like this. The late autumn air in Annapolis settled in with a quiet heaviness that didn't demand attention but refused to be ignored. The sky stretched low and gray over the harbor, not storming, not clearing, just suspended in that in-between state where the light felt muted and distant. A thin breeze moved in from the Chesapeake Bay, carrying the scent of salt, damp wood, and aging metal from the docks. The marina was quieter than usual for that time of year. A few sailboats rocked gently in their slips, ropes creaking in slow rhythm, while scattered figures moved along the waterfront with the unspoken understanding that colder days were coming. It wasn't a place built for noise. It held on to things, sounds, memories, people who had once belonged and never fully left. Caleb Archer walked along the wooden pier with the steady, grounded pace of someone who had spent most of his adult life moving with purpose. At 38, he carried the build of a man shaped by years in the field, broad shoulders, controlled strength, movements that never wasted energy. His dark brown hair was cut short, close to the scalp in a style that required no maintenance, and his face was marked by a faint scar near his left brow, subtle but permanent, like a detail he had long stopped noticing. His eyes, a muted gray blue, didn't wander. They observed everything. He wore a red-black plaid flannel shirt layered over a dark, worn t-shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, paired with faded jeans and heavy boots that made almost no sound against the wood despite their weight. Nothing about him was careless. Even standing still, he carried the quiet tension of someone who had learned long ago that stillness didn't mean safety. Beside him moved Vargo, a 5-year-old German shepherd whose presence carried as much intention as Caleb's. The dog's coat was a deep blend of black and dark sable, thick and well-maintained despite the years of service it suggested. His posture was upright, controlled, every step aligned with Caleb's without the need for command. Vargo's ears remained alert, constantly adjusting to subtle shifts in the environment, while his amber eyes tracked movement with calm precision. He was not restless. He was aware. There was a difference, and it was one that Caleb trusted more than anything else in the world. Caleb hadn't planned to stay long in Annapolis. The trip was meant to be temporary. Handle the paperwork, decide what to do with the house, leave. That had been the structure. Clean, efficient, controlled. But places like this didn't work that way. They had a way of reaching into you whether you wanted them to or not. The harbor wasn't just a location. It was a reminder of a life that had been interrupted, of questions that had never been answered properly. He didn't come here for closure. He came because something unfinished had finally demanded his attention. He kept his focus forward, letting the rhythm of the walk settle his thoughts. The sound of the boards beneath his boots, the light pull of the leash in his hand, the steady presence of Vargo at his side. It was enough to keep everything else at a distance. Until Vargo slowed. It wasn't abrupt. There was no tension in the leash, no sign of alarm. Just a shift. Subtle, deliberate, enough for Caleb to feel it immediately. His hand tightened slightly on the leash without looking down. "Vargo," he said quietly, his voice low, controlled. No response. That alone changed everything. Vargo did not ignore commands. Not in the field. Not here. Caleb's attention sharpened instantly, his gaze following the dog's line of sight. A man sat on a bench ahead, positioned near the edge of the pier where the water darkened beneath the fading light. He was alone. His posture slightly hunched, but not collapsed. Thin frame, layered under a weathered coat that had seen too many seasons. The fabric hung loosely, as if it had once fit better years ago. His hair was gray, unevenly cut, blending into an untrimmed beard that gave him the appearance of someone who had stopped paying attention to how he looked long ago. But there was something else, something that didn't align with the rest of him. Stillness. Not the empty kind, the controlled kind. Caleb slowed his pace, not stopping, just adjusting. His eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the man without making it obvious. Years of training had taught him how to read posture, tension, intent. This wasn't just another homeless figure drifting through the harbor. There was structure in the way the man sat, a contained awareness that didn't match his appearance. Vargo took one step forward. No aggression, no hesitation, just decision. Caleb followed, closing the distance with measured calm. The man lifted his head slowly as they approached. His eyes passed over Caleb without locking on, as if he was aware but choosing not to engage fully. There was a flicker there, brief, sharp, then gone. "Sorry," Caleb said, his tone neutral. "He doesn't usually stop." The man gave a small nod. "Dogs notice things," he replied. His voice was rough, worn down by time and disuse, but not weak. There was weight behind it, control, even now. Caleb didn't respond immediately. He shifted his stance slightly, keeping his body relaxed while his attention remained fixed. Vargo moved closer, his nose lifting slightly, catching the air. Oil. Metal. Faint, but there. Then Vargo did something he rarely did without instruction. He lowered himself to the ground beside the bench, not in comfort, in choice. Caleb felt it settle in his chest, that quiet certainty he had learned to trust. Vargo wasn't reacting, he was evaluating, and he had made a call. Caleb exhaled slowly and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small paper cup he had picked up moments earlier from a nearby stand. "You need anything?" he asked, offering it without stepping too close. The man lifted his hand slightly to take it. The sleeve of his coat shifted. Just enough. Caleb froze. A scar curved across the inside of the man's wrist. Pale, aged, but distinct. Not random. Not accidental. It followed a clean arc, the kind that came from a sharp edge, fast movement, and something going wrong in a controlled space. For a second, the world narrowed. The harbor. The sound of the water. The distant voices. Gone. He was somewhere else. A small workshop. The smell of machine oil thick in the air. The sound of metal grinding against metal. His father standing over a workbench, sleeves rolled, hands steady. Then a slip. A sharp intake of breath. Blood. Not panic. Never panic. Just a quiet, controlled voice saying it was nothing. The same shape. The same place. Caleb's hand remained suspended midair. The man noticed. His fingers tightened slightly, then he pulled his sleeve down with subtle urgency, covering the scar. "Name's Walter," he said, not looking at Caleb. "Just passing through." Caleb lowered his hand slowly, placing the cup on the bench instead. His mind was moving, controlled but fast, sorting what he had seen from what he remembered. It wasn't just the scar. It was the stillness. The way the man avoided direct eye contact, not out of fear, but choice. The way his body held tension without showing it. Vargo shifted slightly, pressing closer to the man's leg without touching him fully. Close enough to anchor, not enough to crowd. Caleb watched carefully. "You been here long?" he asked. "Long enough," Walter replied. Simple answer, but not empty. Caleb nodded once, more to himself than to the man. He could feel something beneath the surface now. Not certainty, not yet, but something close. He glanced once more at the man's wrist, now hidden beneath worn fabric, then back to his face. For the first time since stepping onto that pier, Caleb Archer wasn't just walking through Annapolis. He was standing at the edge of something that didn't belong to the present, and whatever it was, Vargo had already found it first. The sky over Annapolis had darkened further by the time Caleb Archer stepped away from the pier, though the air remained steady, neither colder nor warmer, just suspended in that same muted stillness. He did not look back immediately. That was instinct. Distance first, then reassess. Vargo moved beside him in silence, but the dog's posture had shifted from passive awareness to something more anchored, more deliberate, as if whatever he had sensed near the bench had not been left behind. Caleb walked another 30 yards before stopping near a weathered railing that overlooked the water. The bay stretched out in front of him, dim and endless, reflecting fractured light from the harbor lamps behind. He rested one hand against the wood, his gaze fixed outward, but his mind was not on the water. It was replaying details, not broadly, specifically. The angle of the man's wrist, the exact curvature of the scar, the timing of the sleeve being pulled down, and the voice. Not the words, the control behind them. He exhaled slowly, then turned. The bench was still there. The man had not moved far. He remained seated, the paper cup untouched beside him, his posture unchanged, but there was something different now, subtle. His head was slightly lowered, but not in fatigue, in thought, as if he knew something had shifted and was choosing how to respond to it. Caleb walked back. His steps were slower this time, more measured, not cautious, intentional. Vargo followed without needing direction, his gait steady, eyes locked ahead, ears angled slightly forward. As Caleb approached, the man spoke first. "You don't usually come back," he said quietly. Caleb stopped a few feet away. "I don't usually have a reason," he replied. The man gave a faint nod, still not looking directly at him. His hands rested on his knees now, fingers loosely interlocked, though Caleb noticed the slight tremor that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, containment. Caleb studied him in silence for a moment. Up close, the details were harder to ignore. The lines in the man's face were deep, carved by time and something heavier than age. His beard was uneven, gray threading through darker strands that hinted at what it once had been. His eyes, though tired, were not unfocused. They tracked, slowly, carefully, avoiding direct contact but missing nothing. Caleb shifted his weight slightly. "You said your name's Walter," he said. "That's what I said. Not what I asked." The man's jaw tightened, barely. A small reaction, but enough. He lifted his head a fraction, his gaze brushing past Caleb's shoulder before settling somewhere near the ground again. "Names don't always matter," he replied. Caleb didn't respond right away. He let the silence sit. That was where people filled in gaps, where truth slipped when words tried to control it. Vargo moved closer, stepping within arm's reach of the bench. His nose lifted slightly again, catching the air, then lowering as he settled into a seated position beside the man. Not touching, but close enough to claim space. The man noticed. His eyes flicked down briefly, then lingered a second longer than before. Something shifted there. Not fear, recognition. Not of the dog itself, of what the dog represented. Caleb saw it. "You've been around working dogs," he said. It wasn't a question. The man's fingers tightened again. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Long time ago." Caleb took a step closer. "What kind?" Another pause, longer this time. "Military," the man said. The word landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Caleb's chest tightened slightly, but his expression didn't change. "You serve?" he asked. The man shook his head. "No," he replied. "I worked around them." Caleb nodded once, though nothing about the answer settled anything. If anything, it opened more space. A woman passed behind them along the pier, her footsteps soft but noticeable in the quiet. She was in her early 40s, tall and lean, wearing a long navy coat and carrying a canvas bag filled with books. Her blonde hair was tied loosely at the back, strands slipping free in the wind. Her posture was upright, composed, the kind that came from years of routine and self-reliance. She glanced briefly at Caleb, then at the man on the bench, her expression neutral but observant. She did not stop, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes toward the man before she continued on. Not familiarity, awareness, as if she had seen him here before, more than once, and had chosen not to intervene. Caleb noticed. The man noticed that Caleb noticed. Neither of them spoke about it. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a sharper scent of salt and rust. Vargo's ears adjusted, then settled again. Caleb leaned forward slightly, resting his hands loosely against his thighs. His voice lowered, not aggressive, not demanding, just steady. "That scar," he said. "You get it from a cutting wheel?" The man's shoulders stiffened. For a second, it looked like he might stand, might leave. But he didn't. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his breath uneven for the first time. "Something like that," he said. Caleb's gaze didn't move. "It's precise," he replied. "Clean edge, not random." The man swallowed, his throat tightened visibly. Caleb continued, quieter now. I saw someone get a scar like that once. Silence. The kind that stretched. The kind that forced a decision. Vargo shifted again, this time leaning slightly into the man's leg, just enough contact to ground, not enough to startle. The man's hand moved instinctively. It hovered above the dog's back for a second, then rested, carefully, like it had been years since he had touched something steady. Caleb watched closely. That movement, that hesitation, that familiarity. You used to say it didn't matter, Caleb said, his voice almost distant now. If it worked, it worked. Didn't have to look clean. The man's fingers froze in Vargo's fur. His head lowered further, his shoulders tightening in a way that wasn't physical strain. It was something deeper, something breaking through control. Caleb didn't stop. You called me kid, he said, even when I told you to stop. The man's breathing changed, not louder, but uneven, the kind that couldn't be controlled fully anymore. Caleb took one final step closer. No one else did that, he said quietly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had been held back. The man's hand trembled slightly against Vargo's back. His fingers pressed into the thick fur as if anchoring himself to something real. Then, slowly, he spoke. Nate. The word came out rough, worn down, like it hadn't been used in years. Caleb didn't move, didn't react. But something inside him tightened so sharply it felt like it might split open. He turned his head fully now, his eyes locking onto the man's face. Say it again, Caleb said. The man swallowed hard. His lips parted, then pressed together before he forced the word out again. Nate. Clearer this time. There was no hesitation left in it. Caleb stared at him. Up close, the details aligned. Not perfectly. Time had changed too much. But enough. The structure beneath the age, the set of the jaw, the way his eyes avoided and then held, like they were measuring risk and memory at the same time. 20 years didn't erase that. It buried it. Look at me, Caleb said. The man hesitated. Then he did. And in that moment, the distance collapsed. Caleb, the man said quietly. Not Nate. Caleb. The name landed differently. Present. Real. Caleb's jaw tightened. His voice dropped, steadier than he felt. Elliot. It wasn't a question. The man closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. Once. That was all it took. No explanation, no denial. Just confirmation. Elliot Archer opened his eyes again, and this time he didn't look away. There was fear there. Not of Caleb, of something else. Something that had followed him longer than time. You shouldn't have come back here, Elliot said. Caleb's expression didn't change. I didn't know you were here. That's not what I meant. Vargo shifted closer again, pressing lightly against Elliot's leg, his presence steady, grounding, as if refusing to let either man retreat into distance again. Caleb glanced once at the dog, then back at Elliot. I've spent 20 years thinking you were gone, Caleb said quietly. I think I deserve more than that. Elliot's gaze flicked toward the water, then back to Caleb. For a moment, it looked like he might speak, might explain, but instead his expression tightened. You need to leave, he said. Caleb didn't move. Elliot's voice rose slightly, urgency breaking through control. Now. The word carried something real behind it, not anger, not rejection, fear. Caleb held his gaze for a long second, then nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. He stepped back slowly, his hand tightening slightly on Vargo's leash. Then we're not done, Caleb said. Elliot didn't respond, but he didn't deny it either. Caleb turned and walked away, his pace steady, controlled, the same as before. But nothing about him was the same anymore, because the man he thought had disappeared 20 years ago wasn't gone. And whatever had taken him away was still out there. Morning came to Annapolis without ceremony. A pale gray light slipping through low clouds and settling across quiet streets still damp from the night air. The harbor had lost its evening glow, replaced by a colder clarity that made everything look sharper than it felt. The wind carried less salt this time, more of the dry chill that hinted winter was close. It was the kind of morning that didn't invite reflection. Yet Caleb Archer found none of his thoughts willing to stay quiet. He drove without music, hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward but unfocused on anything beyond the road. Vargo sat in the passenger seat, posture upright, gaze occasionally shifting between the passing streets and Caleb's profile. The dog had not slept deeply. Caleb had noticed. Not restlessness, not anxiety, awareness that had not switched off. Neither had Caleb. The house came into view at the end of a narrow, well-maintained street lined with tall oaks that had begun shedding their leaves. It stood unchanged in structure, a two-story home with clean lines, pale siding, and windows that reflected more than they revealed. The lawn was trimmed precisely, edges sharp, not a blade out of place. It wasn't welcoming, it was controlled. Caleb parked at the curb and stepped out, the cold air settling around him immediately. He adjusted the cuff of his red-black flannel shirt without thinking, then moved toward the front door. Vargo followed, close at his side, his steps quiet but intentional. Caleb didn't hesitate when he reached the door. He knocked once. The response was immediate. The door opened with quiet precision, revealing Diane Whitlock standing exactly where she had likely been when she heard the first sound. She was in her early 50s, tall and slender, her posture upright with the kind of composure that came from years of discipline not tied to physical labor, but to control. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a smooth, structured style, not a strand out of place. Her face carried sharp, refined features, her expression calm, almost unreadable. There was no warmth in her eyes, but there was awareness. Always awareness. She wore a fitted charcoal blouse and tailored slacks, every detail intentional. She had not changed for the morning. She had prepared. "Caleb," she said evenly, "you're early." "I didn't call," he replied. "You didn't need to." There was no question in her tone, only observation. She stepped aside without invitation. Caleb entered. The interior of the house matched her entirely. Clean, structured, minimal. Every object had a place, and nothing existed without purpose. The air carried a faint scent of polished wood and something neutral, almost sterile. It didn't feel lived in, it felt maintained. Vargo paused just inside the doorway, his head lifting slightly as he took in the environment. His ears adjusted once, then he moved forward, settling near Caleb's left side again, though his attention remained split between the space and Diane. She noticed the dog immediately. "That one's new," she said, her tone neutral but precise. "His name's Vargo," Caleb replied. Diane's gaze lingered on the dog a moment longer. Not fear, not discomfort, calculation. "He's well trained," she said. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't sit. Neither did she. Silence settled between them, not awkward, not strained, familiar. Diane broke it first. "You didn't come here to talk about the house," she said. "No." Her eyes held his for a second longer. "What is it then?" Caleb's voice didn't change. "Elliot." The name landed in the room without echo, but it carried weight all the same. Diane didn't react immediately, not outwardly, but Caleb saw it. A fraction of a second where her gaze tightened, just enough to register the shift before it smoothed out again. "That part of your life is finished," she said. "I saw him," Caleb replied. Another pause, slightly longer this time. Diane tilted her head just enough to study him more closely. Not disbelief, recalibration. "You're mistaken." Caleb took one step forward. "I don't mistake something like that." Her posture didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A shift from dismissal to assessment. "You've been away a long time," she said. "Memory doesn't always hold the way we think it does." Caleb's expression remained steady. "He called me Nate." That stopped her. Not visibly to anyone else, but Caleb wasn't anyone else. Her breath slowed, almost imperceptibly. "That doesn't mean anything," she said. "It means he knew me." Diane held his gaze, then looked past him briefly, as if considering something beyond the room. "You don't understand what happened back then," she said. "Then explain it." The words were simple, direct. There was no challenge in them, only expectation. Diane didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved toward the kitchen, her steps measured, controlled. She poured a glass of water without asking if Caleb wanted one, then set it down untouched. "He left," she said finally. "That's the truth." That's the version I was given. It's the only version that matters. Caleb watched her for a long moment. No, he said quietly. It's the one that was convenient. That was the first time something sharper surfaced in her expression. Not anger, resistance. You're stepping into something you don't understand, she said. Caleb didn't move. Then make me understand. Diane turned back toward him fully now. Her composure remained, but the edges had shifted. He was involved in things that would have destroyed everything connected to him, she said. This house, your future, your name. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. And you protected me. Yes. The answer came too quickly, too clean. Caleb held her gaze. From what? Diane didn't respond. The silence stretched. Vargo shifted slightly, his body angling just a fraction closer to Caleb, his presence grounding, alert without tension. Caleb noticed. He stepped forward again, closing the distance just enough to change the dynamic. You're not telling me everything, he said. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm telling you what matters. That's not the same thing. Another pause. Then she spoke, quieter now. There are things better left where they are. Caleb shook his head once. Not anymore. Diane studied him carefully. For the first time, there was something in her gaze that resembled uncertainty. Not loss of control, not yet, but awareness that control was shifting. You saw him, she said. Then you know what he's become. Caleb didn't react. He's alive, he replied. That's not the same as being present. Caleb's voice lowered. He told me to leave. Diane's expression changed again, subtly. He would, she said. Why? This time she didn't hesitate. Because he knows what happens if you don't. The words settled heavier than anything else she had said. Caleb's mind moved through it quickly. Not emotion, pattern. You're not afraid of him, he said. Diane didn't deny it. You're afraid of what he might say. That landed, clean, direct. Her silence confirmed it more than any answer could. Caleb stepped back slightly, creating space again, his decision already forming. You knew he was here, he said. Diane didn't respond. That's why the house paperwork is moving now. Her eyes flicked toward him. There, confirmation. You should let it go, she said quietly. Caleb shook his head once. I don't let things go when they don't make sense. Diane's composure returned fully now. You always did, she said. Caleb turned toward the door. That was before I knew better. Vargo moved immediately with him, staying close, his posture steady. At the threshold, Caleb paused, not to reconsider, to finish. I'm going to find out what happened, he said. Diane's voice came from behind him, calm but firm. You won't like what you find. Caleb didn't turn. I don't need to like it. He stepped outside into the cold morning air, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. The street was still empty. The sky hadn't changed. But something had shifted. Because this was no longer about whether Elliot Archer was alive. It was about why he had been forced to disappear. And for the first time, Caleb understood one thing clearly. The past hadn't stayed buried. It had been kept that way. The afternoon light over Annapolis had shifted into a colder tone by the time Caleb Archer parked outside the old municipal building that housed the town's historical records and public archives. It wasn't a place that drew attention. A two-story brick structure with narrow windows and a faded plaque near the entrance, it stood quietly between newer developments that had long since outgrown its purpose. The kind of building people passed without noticing, unless they were looking for something that wasn't meant to be easily found. Caleb stepped out of the truck, adjusting the cuff of his red-black flannel as the wind cut slightly sharper than before. Vargo exited smoothly beside him, landing without sound, his posture immediately alert as his gaze swept the area. There were only a few cars in the lot. No movement beyond a man in his 60s walking slowly along the sidewalk, his shoulders slightly hunched, his pace careful but steady. He wore a brown overcoat that hung loosely from his thin frame, and his gray hair was combed back unevenly. His face was lined, not just with age, but with the weight of something carried too long. His eyes met Caleb's briefly, then lingered a second longer than necessary, as if recognition hovered just beneath the surface before he turned and continued on. Caleb watched him go, then turned toward the building. Inside, the air shifted immediately. Warmer, still, and filled with the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. The lighting was soft, almost muted, as if the place itself resisted anything too bright. Rows of shelves extended deeper into the space, filled with archived files, binders, and records that had not been touched in years. Behind the front desk stood a woman in her mid-30s, tall and lean, her posture straight but not rigid. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose knot at the back of her head, strands escaping naturally rather than being forced into place. She wore simple glasses with thin frames that rested low on her nose, giving her the habit of looking over them when she focused. Her clothing was understated, a dark green sweater and black slacks, but clean, deliberate. There was nothing careless about her. Her expression carried quiet attentiveness, the kind that came from years of working in silence, observing more than speaking. Her name tag read, Lena Hartwell. She looked up as Caleb approached. Her eyes moved from him to Vargo, pausing just a moment longer on the dog before returning to Caleb. "You don't get many like him in here," she said, her voice calm, steady, with a slight edge of curiosity she didn't try to hide. "He's trained," Caleb replied. "I figured." Her gaze softened slightly, not toward Caleb but toward Vargo. "Working dog?" "Yes." She nodded once, as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. "What can I help you with?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "I'm looking for records," he said. "Property transfers, about 20 years back, anything tied to the Archer name." Lena didn't react immediately, but something in her posture shifted. Not defensiveness, awareness. "That's a wide range," she said. "Do you have a specific address?" Caleb gave it. She repeated it quietly, then turned to a terminal behind the desk, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The screen reflected faintly in her glasses as she scanned through entries. After a moment, her movements slowed. "There are records," she said, "but not where they should be." Caleb's gaze narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" She turned back to him, studying him more carefully now. "It means they exist," she said, "but they've been flagged and moved to restricted storage." "Why?" Lena hesitated, then chose her words carefully. "Records don't get restricted without a reason." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give without access." Caleb held her gaze. "Who has access?" She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms loosely, not defensive, but measured. "Technically, a few people. Realistically, one." "Who?" She watched him for a moment longer, as if deciding whether to say it. "Gordon Pierce." The name settled in the space between them. Caleb didn't recognize it. Lena noticed. "He's a retired judge," she continued. "Been around longer than most of these records. If something was moved, locked, or sealed 20 years ago, there's a good chance he was involved in the decision." Caleb processed that. "Where do I find him?" Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Vargo again. The dog remained still, but his eyes had shifted toward her, calm, observant, as if reading something beneath the surface. "You're not here out of curiosity," she said. "No." She nodded once. "Then you should know something." Caleb waited. "The Archer records," she said quietly, "aren't the only ones that disappeared around that time." Caleb's focus sharpened. "What else?" "Property transfers along the waterfront," she replied. "Small pieces at first, then larger ones, all tied together in ways that don't show up unless you know where to look." "And you do?" Lena gave a faint, almost humorless smile. "I work here," she said. "It's my job to notice patterns." There was something else in her tone, something personal. Caleb caught it. "This affects you," he said. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "My father owned a small repair shop near the docks," she said. "Lost it around the same time those records were moved. No clear explanation, just paperwork that didn't make sense." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something aligned internally. Pattern, motive, timing. "Gordon Pierce," he said again. Lena stepped out from behind the desk, moving with quiet purpose. She grabbed a small notepad, wrote down an address, and handed it to him. "He lives on the edge of town," she said. "Old house, hard to miss." Caleb took the paper. "Why help me?" Lena met his gaze directly now. "Because whatever happened back then," she said, "it didn't just affect your family." Vargo shifted slightly closer to Caleb, his body angled outward now, as if marking the moment as something that mattered. Caleb nodded once. "That's enough." He turned to leave, Vargo moving with him instantly. At the door, he paused. "Lena." She looked up. "If I come back," he said, "I'll need more than patterns." Her expression remained steady. "Then bring me something real," she replied. Caleb stepped outside into the cooling air, the weight of the place settling behind him. The street was quieter now, but not empty. The same older man from earlier stood across the road, partially obscured by a tree, his posture angled slightly toward the building. He wasn't pretending to pass by this time. He was watching. Caleb didn't react outwardly. He simply walked to his truck, opened the door, and got in. Vargo followed. As the engine started, Caleb glanced once in the rearview mirror. The man was still there, not moving, not hiding, just waiting. Caleb shifted the truck into drive, his mind already moving ahead. This wasn't just about Elliot Archer anymore. This was about something larger, something structured. And for the first time, Caleb wasn't just following a question. He was stepping into a system that had been built to keep answers buried. The sky over Annapolis carried a dull, washed-out blue as late afternoon leaned quietly toward evening, the kind of light that revealed more than it softened. The wind had picked up slightly along the outer edges of town, moving through the narrow roads that led away from the harbor and into areas where the houses thinned out and the land felt less observed. Caleb Archer drove without rushing, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed forward but tracking more than just the road. The man he had seen outside the records building had not followed directly, but that didn't mean he wasn't part of something that extended beyond a single moment. Caleb had learned long ago that absence didn't equal safety. It often meant the opposite. Vargo sat upright in the passenger seat, his posture alert but controlled, his ears adjusting subtly with each passing sound. The dog had not relaxed since they left the archive. Not anxious, not agitated, focused. There was a difference, and Caleb trusted it. The address Lena Hartwell had given him led away from the structured parts of Annapolis and into a quieter stretch of land where older properties sat further apart, their conditions varying between maintained and forgotten. The house came into view at the end of a narrow gravel road, partially obscured by trees that had not been trimmed in years. It was small, aged, its white paint worn thin and chipped in places, the porch slightly uneven, but still standing with a kind of quiet resistance. It wasn't abandoned, it was held together. Caleb parked without pulling too close. He stepped out, adjusting his red-black flannel against the wind, then moved toward the house. Vargo followed immediately, his movement low and deliberate now, scanning, reading, not just the structure but the silence around it. Before Caleb reached the porch, the door opened. Gordon Pierce stepped out slowly, as if he had been expecting the knock before it came. He was in his late 60s, tall but slightly stooped at the shoulders, his frame thin beneath a dark wool sweater and pressed trousers that suggested habits he had never let go of. His gray hair was combed neatly back, though uneven at the edges, and a pair of rectangular glasses sat firmly on his face. His eyes, though aged, were sharp, observant, carrying the kind of clarity that didn't fade with time. There was tension in his hands, a faint tremor that appeared when they were still, not from weakness but from something internal that never fully settled. "You took your time," Gordon said quietly. Caleb stopped at the base of the steps. "You knew I was coming." Gordon gave a small nod. It was only a matter of when. His gaze shifted briefly to Vargo, lingering a second longer than necessary. "That dog doesn't miss much," he added. "Neither do I," Caleb replied. Gordon stepped aside slightly. "Then you should come in." The interior of the house was modest but organized. Books lined the walls, stacked both on shelves and in small piles across tables and corners. The air smelled faintly of paper and something medicinal, subtle but present. A single lamp lit the main room, casting a warm but narrow glow that left the edges in shadow. It wasn't neglect, it was containment. Vargo entered first, moving a few steps in before settling near the doorway, positioning himself where he could see both Caleb and Gordon at all times. His body remained relaxed, but his eyes never stopped moving. Caleb stayed standing. Gordon didn't offer a seat. "You've spoken to Elliot," Gordon said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Gordon's jaw tightened slightly. "Then you already know more than you were meant to." "I don't know enough." Gordon exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering a fraction. "No," he said, "you don't." He moved toward a small cabinet near the wall and crouched with visible effort, reaching inside. His movements were slower than his voice suggested they should be, his hands unsteady for a moment before regaining control. He pulled out a small metal box, worn at the edges, the surface scratched from years of use. He held it for a second, not opening it, as if deciding whether this moment should happen at all. Caleb watched without speaking. Finally, Gordon stood and placed the box on the table between them. "These aren't mine," he said. "They never were." Caleb stepped closer. Gordon opened the lid. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, bound together loosely with a thin, faded string. The paper had aged, edges curled slightly, the color no longer white but softened into something older. Each envelope carried the same name written in steady, deliberate handwriting. Caleb. Not staff sergeant, not anything formal, just Caleb. Caleb reached out, his fingers brushing against the top envelope before lifting it carefully. The paper felt fragile but intact. He turned it over. No stamp, no address, just the name. "Every year," Gordon said quietly. "On your birthday." Caleb didn't look up. He opened the envelope. The letter inside was simple. No long explanations, no attempts to justify anything. Just a few lines written in a steady hand, speaking about where Elliot imagined Caleb might be, what he hoped he had become, and a single sentence that closed the letter. "I'm still here." Caleb's hand tightened slightly. Not enough to crease the paper, but enough to feel it. Gordon watched him carefully. "He never sent them," he said. Caleb looked up. "Why?" Gordon hesitated, then answered. "Because he tried once." The room settled into stillness. 6 years after he disappeared, Gordon continued, he thought enough time had passed. Thought maybe the risk had faded. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. It hadn't. Gordon's gaze shifted, not away but inward, as if he was pulling something forward from memory. "They found him within 2 days," he said. "Didn't touch him. Didn't need to." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They made it clear," Gordon added, "that if he reached out again, they wouldn't come for him." Silence. "They would come for you." The words landed without force, but they carried weight. Caleb looked back down at the letters, then at the stack beneath them. Years. Decades. Words written and never delivered. "He stayed gone," Caleb said. "He stayed hidden," Gordon corrected. The distinction mattered. Caleb set the letter back carefully, aligning it with the others. "What was he trying to expose?" he asked. Gordon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to a nearby shelf and pulled down a thin folder, placing it beside the box. "Money," he said finally, "but not the kind that sits still." Caleb opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, transfers, signatures, numbers that didn't align cleanly. "Property along the waterfront," Gordon continued, "broken into smaller transactions, spread across multiple accounts. Enough to avoid attention individually, but together—" He let the sentence fade. Caleb understood. "A system," he said. Gordon nodded once. "And Elliot was in it?" "No," Gordon replied. "He found it." Caleb's gaze hardened. "And someone made sure he took the fall." Gordon didn't deny it. Caleb flipped to another page. The signatures caught his attention. "They're altered," he said. "Yes." Caleb looked up. "Diane." Gordon exhaled slowly. "She wasn't alone," he said, "but she knew, and she chose a side." Caleb absorbed that. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in what it held. Vargo shifted slightly, moving closer to the table, his body settling beside Caleb's leg. His presence was steady, grounding, as if anchoring the moment before it could drift into something heavier. Caleb closed the folder. "Why keep this?" he asked. Gordon's expression changed. Not regret, something quieter. "Because I didn't stop it," he said. Caleb held his gaze. "I signed off on the restrictions," Gordon continued. "I told myself it was procedure, that it wasn't my place to question." He shook his head faintly. It was. The admission settled between them, years too late, but still present. Caleb looked at the letters again, then back at Gordon. "This isn't over," he said. Gordon nodded. "No," he replied. "It's just starting." Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, brushing against the house with a low, steady sound. Caleb gathered the folder, leaving the letters where they were, not taking them, not yet. He turned toward the door, Vargo moving instantly with him. At the threshold, Caleb paused. "Why now?" he asked without turning. Gordon's voice came from behind him, quieter than before. "Because you came back." Caleb stepped outside into the fading light, the cold air sharper now, more defined. He didn't look back, but he didn't need to, because for the first time, the past wasn't just something he was remembering. It was something he could prove. The morning in Annapolis arrived with a pale, brittle clarity, the kind that stripped warmth from the air and left everything exposed. The sky stretched wide and thin, a washed blue that held no promise of change. The harbor below reflected it without movement, the water flat, almost motionless, as if even the tide had slowed to listen. It was the kind of morning where nothing hid easily. Caleb Archer understood that instinctively the moment he stepped out of the truck. He hadn't slept much, not because of restlessness, but because there was nothing left to process quietly. The pieces had begun to align, and once that started, stopping wasn't an option. Vargo moved beside him with the same controlled awareness, his posture steady, his attention not searching, but anchored. The dog no longer scanned the environment the way he had before. He was watching Caleb. That was enough. The building Lena Hartwell had mentioned the night before sat closer to the edge of town, less visible than the archive but more active. A private records office, the kind used for legal overflow and document storage that didn't belong in public access. It wasn't large, but it was maintained. That alone told Caleb everything he needed to know. He stepped inside without hesitation. The interior was brighter than the archive, lit by overhead fluorescents that left no shadows to hide in. Rows of metal cabinets lined the walls, labeled in precise, uniform print. There was movement here, quiet but structured. Work happening behind controlled surfaces. Behind a central desk stood Lena Hartwell. She looked up immediately. Her posture straightened slightly as she recognized him, but there was no surprise in her expression, only readiness. Her blonde hair was pulled back more tightly today, her glasses set higher on her nose, and her clothing, dark slacks and a fitted gray sweater, felt more deliberate than the day before. She had prepared. "You found him," she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded once. "Gordon." Lena's eyes held his for a moment, searching for confirmation beyond the word. "And?" she asked. Caleb stepped forward, placing the folder Gordon had given him onto the desk. "He kept copies," Caleb said. Lena's fingers hovered over the folder for a second before she opened it. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages, scanning, recognizing patterns faster than most would. Her breathing slowed slightly as she reached the middle of the documents. "This is enough to show structure," she said quietly. "Not enough to prove intent. It gets us closer." She nodded, then paused. Her fingers stopped on a single document. Her expression shifted, subtle, but clear. "This wasn't in the archive," she said. Caleb didn't respond. He watched her. "It wouldn't be," she added, almost to herself. "This is the part they'd never leave behind." She turned the document toward him. It wasn't just another transfer. It was a consolidated record, property lines, account numbers, names, and at the center of it, a signature. Not Elliot's, not altered, real. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Who is it?" he asked. Lena swallowed once before answering. "Your mother." The words settled differently than anything else had so far. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something inside him shifted. "She was listed as a primary holder," Lena continued, her voice steady but quieter now. "Not just connected, central." Caleb processed that. "She died before any of this surfaced," he said. Lena nodded. "Which means whatever she owned," she said, "would have transferred." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "To me." Lena met his gaze. "Yes." Silence followed. Not confusion, not disbelief. Structure. Everything aligned with a different clarity now. Caleb's enlistment, his clean records, the absence of any legal entanglement tied to his name. It wasn't luck. It was protection. "They needed him gone," Caleb said. Lena didn't respond. She didn't need to.
And they needed me clean, he added.
This time, she nodded. If your name had been attached, she said, everything tied to those assets would have collapsed under scrutiny. Caleb exhaled slowly. So they moved it. And buried the path, Lena finished. Vargo shifted closer, his body settling beside Caleb's leg. Not reacting, not alerting, just present, grounding. Caleb placed his hand briefly against the dog's back, then returned his attention to the document. Who else is tied to this? He asked. Lena flipped through the pages again, more carefully this time. There are layers, she said. Shell accounts, secondary transfers, names that don't stay consistent. She stopped again. This one repeats, she added, tapping a line. Caleb leaned in. Whitlock Holdings. The name didn't need explanation. Diane. Caleb's gaze hardened. She didn't just know, he said. Lena shook her head slightly. No, she replied. She didn't just know. She closed the folder slowly. She positioned herself. The words were calm, but they carried weight. Caleb stepped back slightly, letting the space between them widen just enough to think clearly. She told me he was dangerous, he said. Lena's expression didn't change. That's one way to keep someone from asking questions, she replied. Caleb nodded once, then looked at her directly. This is enough, he said. To start, Lena corrected. Caleb didn't argue, because she was right. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street, the sound muted through the glass but still noticeable. Vargo's ears shifted slightly toward it, then returned to neutral. Lena gathered the documents into a neater stack. You'll need more than copies, she said. Original filings, witness statements, something that ties intent to action. Caleb's mind moved through that quickly. I know where to start, he said. Lena studied him for a moment, then asked quietly, Are you ready for what that means? Caleb didn't hesitate. I've been ready longer than I knew. She nodded once, not in agreement, in understanding. Caleb reached for the folder, taking it back with controlled movement, not rushed, not hesitant, final. He turned toward the door. Vargo moved instantly with him. At the threshold, Caleb paused. Lena. She looked up. If this turns, he said, you step back. Her expression remained steady. I didn't step back the first time, she replied. Caleb held her gaze for a second longer, then nodded. Not approval, recognition. He stepped outside into the cold morning air, the brightness sharper now, more defined. The street stretched ahead of him, quiet, but no longer empty in meaning. Because now he wasn't following traces, he was holding structure. Proof. And for the first time, the question wasn't whether Elliot Archer had been framed. It was how far the system went to make sure it worked. The morning air over Annapolis carried a clean, deliberate stillness, the kind that made every sound feel placed rather than accidental. The harbor stretched wide beneath a pale sky, flags along the waterfront moving in slow, controlled rhythm with the breeze. People had already begun gathering near the memorial platform, veterans in dark coats, civilians in quiet clusters, their conversations low and respectful. It wasn't an event built for attention, it was built for memory. That was exactly why Caleb Archer had chosen it. He stood just outside the edge of the crowd, his posture grounded, shoulders squared beneath his red-black flannel, his expression calm but unreadable. Vargo remained at his side, close but not pressing, his body relaxed in appearance yet fully attentive, eyes shifting occasionally between the movement around them and the still figure behind Caleb. Elliot Archer stood a few steps back. He looked different. Not restored, not unchanged, but steadier. The worn coat was gone, replaced by simple, clean clothing Caleb had brought him earlier that morning. A dark jacket, plain trousers, nothing that drew attention, but enough to remove the immediate weight of the past from his appearance. His hair remained uneven, his face still marked by time, but his posture had shifted. His shoulders were no longer drawn inward, his gaze, though cautious, no longer avoided everything around him. Caleb turned slightly toward him. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Elliot shook his head once. I do, he replied. His voice was still rough, but it held something new beneath it. Not strength, resolve. Caleb studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once and turned back toward the gathering. Near the center stood Samuel Briggs, a retired naval officer in his early 60s, broad-shouldered though softened by age, his gray hair cut short and neat, his expression steady with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades leading without needing to raise his voice. He had been organizing these harbor memorials for years, known to most of the people present, respected without question. He noticed Caleb immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly, recognition flickering, then settling. "Didn't expect you here," Samuel said as Caleb approached. "I needed a place where people listen," Caleb replied. Samuel nodded once. "They will." He stepped aside without asking anything further. Caleb moved toward the small wooden podium, placing his hands lightly against its edges. He didn't rush. He didn't scan the crowd. He simply stood there until the quiet settled naturally, conversations fading without instruction. People turned not because they recognized him, but because something in his presence told them to pay attention. Fargo remained just behind him, sitting now, his posture upright, gaze steady, not searching for threat, but fixed on Caleb. Caleb looked up. "There are names here," he began, his voice even, controlled, carrying just enough to reach the edges of the gathering. "People we remember for what they gave." He paused briefly, letting the words settle. "But there are others," he continued, "who are remembered for what they didn't take." A few heads shifted slightly, attention sharpened. "Not everyone who disappears walks away," Caleb said. "Some step back because staying would cost someone else more than leaving ever could." The silence deepened. Caleb's gaze moved across the crowd slowly, not searching for agreement, not demanding it, simply placing the truth where it could stand on its own. "And when that happens," he added, "the story that remains isn't always the truth. It's just the version that was easier to believe." A murmur passed through the edges of the gathering, quiet, restrained, but present. Caleb stepped back slightly from the podium, turning just enough to look behind him. "Today," he said, "I'm not here to talk about loss." His voice lowered slightly. "I'm here to correct something that never should have been buried." He didn't call Elliot forward. He didn't repeat the invitation. He simply waited. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Elliot stepped forward. Slow at first, measured. Each step deliberate, as if he was crossing more than just distance. The crowd shifted slightly, not outwardly, but in attention, people leaning in without realizing it. When Elliot reached the front, he stopped beside Caleb, his eyes scanning the faces in front of him, not with fear, not with shame, but with something closer to acceptance. Recognition came quietly. A man near the front straightened slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Elliot's face. Another followed, then another. It wasn't sudden, it spread, from uncertainty to realization. Samuel Briggs stepped closer, his gaze fixed. "I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath. Caleb stepped back, giving Elliot the space. No introduction, no explanation, just presence. Elliot didn't speak immediately. His hands remained at his sides, fingers still, the tremor that had followed him for years now barely visible. He took a breath, slow, controlled, then looked directly at the crowd. "I didn't leave," he said. That was all. The words carried further than any speech could have. Caleb reached into his jacket and placed the documents on the podium. Copies, clean, organized. Property records, altered signatures, layered transfers, all arranged in a way that didn't need explanation for those who understood what they were looking at. There were no raised voices, no immediate reactions, just a shift. People stepping back internally from the story they had carried for 2 decades. At the edge of the gathering, Diane Whitlock stood. She had not approached the center, she had not spoken, but she had come. Her posture remained composed, her expression controlled, her clothing precise as always. But something had changed. Not visibly to most, but Caleb saw it. The certainty was gone. Her eyes moved from Elliot to the documents, then to Caleb. She didn't deny anything. She didn't interrupt. She simply watched. And for the first time, that was enough. Caleb turned away from the podium, stepping back toward Elliot. He didn't look at Diane again. He didn't need to. "It's done," Caleb said quietly. Elliot nodded once. Not relief, not yet, but something had shifted. Vargo moved closer, brushing lightly against Elliot's leg, his body steady, grounding, present. Elliot's hand moved instinctively, resting against the dog's back without hesitation this time. Caleb extended his hand. Elliot looked at it for a moment, then took it. Not tightly, not uncertainly, just enough. They stepped away from the podium together, leaving the documents behind. Leaving the explanation behind. Because it didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the truth. And the truth had finally been placed where it could not be buried again. The early morning light over Annapolis no longer carried the same weight it had weeks before. It moved differently now, softer, clearer, spreading across the coastline without resistance. The sky opened in a pale, steady blue, and the breeze that came off the water felt less like something to endure and more like something that belonged. The harbor was already awake, boats shifting gently in place, ropes creaking in slow rhythm, distant voices carrying across the docks without urgency. Nothing rushed, nothing pressed. The town had not changed, but the way it felt had. The house stood near the edge of the coastline, not large, not polished, but no longer silent. The paint was still worn in places, the wood along the porch still uneven underfoot, but the windows were open now, letting air and light move freely through the space. Tools rested against the walls where work had paused, not ended. The structure wasn't finished. It didn't need to be. It was being lived in. Caleb Archer stood just outside the front of the house, sleeves rolled halfway up his red-black flannel, his hands steady as he adjusted the frame of a newly set wooden railing. His movements were precise, controlled, but no longer driven by urgency. There was rhythm in it now, purpose without pressure. The kind that came when something didn't need to be fixed all at once. Vargo lay a few feet away on the porch, his body stretched but alert, his head lifted just enough to track movement across the open yard. His coat caught the morning light in dark, layered tones, and his ears adjusted occasionally at distant sounds, but he did not move from his place. He didn't need to. This was his ground now. Inside the house, Elliot Archer moved slowly but without the hesitation that had once defined him. His steps were still measured, his frame still thinner than it should have been, but his posture had changed. He no longer folded inward. He no longer scanned every corner as if expecting something to follow him through the door. The tension that had lived in his shoulders had eased, not gone, but no longer controlling him. He paused near the doorway, watching Caleb work. "You don't have to rebuild all of it," Elliot said. His voice was quieter now, less worn, though it still carried the weight of years that didn't disappear overnight. Caleb didn't look up immediately. "I know," he replied. Elliot stepped outside, the sunlight settling across his face, highlighting the lines that time had left but no longer deepened. "Then why do it?" Caleb adjusted the railing once more, testing its stability before stepping back slightly. "Because it was left unfinished," he said. Elliot studied him for a moment, then nodded. Not agreement, understanding. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the sound of the water in the distance filling the space between them. It wasn't empty. It didn't need words. Vargo shifted slightly, pushing himself up and moving closer, his body settling beside Elliot's leg. The contact was natural now, unforced. Elliot's hand moved down without hesitation, resting against the dog's back, his fingers pressing lightly into the thick fur. There was no uncertainty left in the gesture. It belonged. Caleb watched it briefly, then turned back to the workbench, picking up a tool without thinking. Movement continued, simple, steady. From the road, a car approached slowly, the sound of its tires on gravel distinct but not intrusive. Caleb glanced up as it came into view, his posture shifting just slightly, awareness returning in a controlled way. The car stopped near the edge of the property. Lena Hartwell stepped out. She wore a long coat this time, dark against the lighter tones of the morning, her hair pulled back loosely, strands moving with the breeze. Her posture was the same as before, upright, composed, but there was less distance in her expression now, less caution. She closed the car door quietly and walked toward the house without hesitation. Vargo watched her approach, his ears adjusting, his gaze steady, but he did not move to intercept. That alone said enough. Caleb set the tool down. "You came out here," he said. Lena gave a faint nod. "I said I would," she replied. Her eyes moved briefly to Elliot, not lingering, not evaluating, just acknowledging. There was no judgment in her expression, only quiet recognition. "You look different," she said to Elliot. Elliot let out a small breath, something close to a restrained smile. "I am," he replied. Lena accepted that without question. She stepped closer to Caleb, stopping just short of the porch. "The records are moving," she said. "Official review. It won't be fast, but it started." Caleb nodded once. "That's enough." Lena studied him for a moment. "You're not going back," she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb shook his head. "No." She glanced toward the house, then back at him. "Good," she said. No explanation followed. None was needed. From the open doorway, a faint sound came from inside the house, the quiet ticking of a clock that had been repaired only days before. It marked time differently now. Not something to outrun, something to move with. Elliot stepped forward slightly, resting his hand against the porch railing Caleb had just finished. "It holds," he said. Caleb looked at it, then at him. "It will," he replied. The words carried more than the structure in front of them. They stood there together, the distance between them no longer defined by absence or uncertainty, but by something quieter. Something rebuilt not from what had been lost, but from what remained. Vargo moved again, circling once before settling between them. His body relaxed fully for the first time since they had arrived in Annapolis. His breathing slowed, steady, grounded. The wind shifted, moving through the open windows, carrying the sound of the water into the house, blending with the quiet rhythm of the morning. Nothing needed to be said, nothing needed to be proven, because the truth had already been placed where it belonged. And for the first time in over 20 years, Caleb Archer wasn't standing at the edge of something unfinished. He was standing inside something that had finally begun. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud or sudden. They arrive quietly, after years of silence, in moments we almost walk past. Caleb believed his father was gone, but the truth was never truly lost. It was protected, hidden, and waiting for the right time to be revealed. God does not forget what is buried in pain. He sees every sacrifice made in silence, every choice made out of love, even when it looks like abandonment. In our daily lives, we may carry misunderstandings, broken relationships, or stories we were told to believe. But God's timing is different from ours. What feels like an ending may only be a pause before truth and healing return. Sometimes the person we thought we lost is still there, waiting for the moment we are ready to see clearly. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Is there someone you need to understand again, forgive, or reach out to? Share this story with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what you felt while listening. And if you believe in second chances and quiet miracles, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about faith, love, and redemption. May God watch over you, guide your path, and bring peace and healing into your life and your family.